I think Richard starting recording. Thank you very much. Thanks, Richard. So welcome everyone to Advanced Bid Writing, and we're going to make a start now. So thanks to those of you who've introduced yourself in the chat box today and just said who you're from. I thought I should introduce myself as well. So my name is Leah Sellinger, and I've worked in the voluntary sector for about 17 years with a fundraising background and mostly working small and medium-sized organisations in the field of mostly in social development, helping people move into more sustainable work, employment, training, education, but also in the arts sector too. My kind of focus as a fundraiser and as a consultant for the last 8 years has really been about creating financially and operationally resilient and sustainable organisations. So I'm all about thinking about income generation that helps you not just now, but in the future. So I'm going to try and bring some of my experience as a fundraiser, but also my experience as a grant maker, and I've worked for grant making organisations and sat on the board of a grant making trust, to today's sessions and also the other modules in this series. And I'll explain a little bit about those in a moment. So where we're starting from, this course, as I said earlier, is part of a series of training courses which is brought to you by the Archive Sector Development Team at the National Archives. And a couple of years ago we put together an application on bid writing, and this is a step on from that. So this is an advanced bid writing course, and so we're expecting people on this course today to just have some of this knowledge, to know what a funding application might contain, have some kind of sorry, just Ruth can't hear. Can everyone else hear me? Yeah, I've got a thumbs up. Yeah, okay. I don't know what Ruth's problem is. Okay, if you want to try toggling your the sound on and off, Ruth. Apologies. Oh, she won't be able to hear me. I'll let Richard, you sort that one out. But yeah, so I'm expecting you to know what funding application should contain, have some understanding what funders might be looking for and the kind of things they do support, and had some experience, be that successful and unsuccessful, looking to submit applications or be the funders for bids and to funders and commissioners. So that's where we are today. This is what we're going to do today, is look, and over the next 3 modules as well, is go a bit more into depth about some of the tips, tricks and hints to make your application and bid writing more successful. So as I said, today is the first of 4 modules, and we're going to start on today. We're thinking about finding funding and when to bid and how to make those decisions. Modules 2 and 3 look much more about the content of structuring a bid, so thinking about how do you articulate and solve a problem in the bid, and how do you stand out and make yourself have impact. And finally, the last module is around budgets and full cost recovery, and looking at ongoing relationships with funders and how they support you. Just to remind you, there's also a parallel series on crowdfunding and digital fundraising delivered by Dr. Claire Routley, being delivered as well. So you can sign up for those modules separately. Fantastic. So we'll kick off with today, and we're going to talk about finding funding. And the problem with finding funding is it can be a bit like looking for a needle in a haystack. Where do you start? How do you know what's important to look at? So the first thing we're going to talk about is how do you know what you're looking for? And then we're going to go on to some ideas and tips and hints about where to look for that funding. So some of the key things you might want to think about when you're identifying funding is what kind of funding do you need? And these are just some of the terms and you may have come across when looking for funding. So just to define what we mean by them so that everyone's on the same page: capital or revenue. So capital as assets that can be purchased or owned. So sometimes it's used to refer to equipment. That could be anything from a table to a computer, or in regard to buildings. So as in redevelopment projects, the cost of professional fees, architects, for example. But things that have to be, you can see and hold it in your hand or look at it, walk around it. Revenue, on the other hand, is the ongoing costs of running an organisation or premises. Are you looking for core funding versus project funding? Now, I personally have a bit of a problem with the idea of core funding. I think all funding is core, and actually you need all of that money to keep you going. And I'll go talk a lot more about that in module 4 at full cost recovery. But by core funding, what's meant really is the ongoing costs of running an organisation. And those costs tend to be quite fixed, regardless of projects or activities that are taking place. So, for example, that might be management time, premises costs, governance costs, finance or HR costs, for example, and they're relatively fixed, whereas project costs will vary depending on the size and scale of project, and maybe also quite time bound. And that relates to other things we might think about as one-off versus ongoing costs. One-off costs, for example, won't be repeated. So that might be an event, a series of activities, or purchase of a capital item, for example. Ongoing costs are those which are repeated: staff salaries, rent, insurance, and so on. And finally, you might be wanting to think about whether you're going to apply for a grant or a contract. With a grant, generally you'll denote the service which is going to be delivered. The funder will receive minimal benefit from that, and quite often the funding will be received up front, although not always. Conversely, a contract, the service and outcomes tend to be created by a commissioner or purchaser, who will generally gain some benefit from that service being delivered. And that may be just, meeting a target, getting achieving their own objectives. So for example, a local authority, we seem to achieve a certain outcome and you can help them make that happen. And they tend to give, but not always, again, retrospectively. So you won't be able to get funding up front. We'll come back to some of this throughout today and also in the other parts of the 4 modules as well. So when you know what kind of funding you want, where do you want to go and look for it? I'm going to put into the chat for you now a handout which has got some of the slides I'm going to talk about right now. Let's change that to, oh, I've just sent that to Richard rather than everyone, sorry. Here we go, I'll put it for everyone now. There we go. No, it's got some of the links to some of these resources, so you don't have to worry about Googling them all. You can download that PDF and you should be able to access those in due time. Just to quickly run through some of them though, and think about ways to use them in finding funding for you. The Charity Commission is a great place to start if you're looking particularly for grant makers. So firstly, you can filter searches by grant makers, organisations who make grants and their areas of interest, and you can look into their own accounts to see who they funded in the past. They won't always have that list available, but quite often they will, so you can see the kinds of organisations they're funding, the kind of work they're interested in supporting. You can also look at similar organisations yourselves, so other archives, other museums, other similar organisations that you think, oh, or even organisations which are more charitable, that you think, oh, they're doing a similar kind of work or in a similar area. So if you're doing a project around youth work, for example, or encouraging young people, you look at organisations that work with young people, who's funding them? What's happening there? So if you go into other charitable organisations' accounts, you can actually go and look and see who's supporting them. And it's a great starting point sometimes for looking at new grant makers. There is a beta search from the Charity Commission, which is actually better than the alpha search. It's been beta for about 8 or 9 years, but it's still much better than the other one. You might have a local authority or CVS service who can either have access to a searchable database or will send out regular newsletters with locally relevant funding opportunities. And likewise, local community foundation who can often act as a funnel for private companies, donors, private donors, or even grant makers, and give funding in that way. So sometimes if they get to know you, they can often funnel funds towards you, which is a great idea. Some of the places to look, 360 Giving is a website which some of you may have come across, which is basically encouraging transparency about grant making process. So around about 100 grant makers post openly all their data on every grant they give, size, length, details of who, summary of what it's about onto that. And you can search using a variety of tools via 360 Giving to see the focus of grant makers and what they're funding. If you are looking at contracts rather than grants, then Contracts Finder is a government portal which is free to access, and anything over 10,000 which is publicly funded has to go on there. Again, you can sign up and register for regular alerts to your inbox, which you can tailor to your work. So for example, evaluations or providing services, whatever that might be. Obviously, then clearly there are funders' websites, and there's examples of ones we thought might be relevant to archives listed there, so you can have a look at directly at their own websites. But also think about using social media, and Fundraising Chat is a really great group on Facebook with about 11,000 fundraisers, mostly UK based, and 90% are UK based, who talk about lots of different things going on in fundraising, not just grant making, but individual donations, corporate trends, new funds that come out, lots of things discussed on there. So it can be a really helpful group for helping you. And thank you, Richard, for sticking those messages in the chat for me. And don't forget your network. Another great free resource for you have might be board members, past donors, current donors who can introduce you to other people who may be able to help. So those are some free resources that you might want to look at. I'm just going to introduce you to some paid resources as well. So Funding Central is NCVO's database of mostly grant makers. It did used to have some contracts, but they've pretty much removed that function now, and it's that. But it is a cheap way to access information, rather than, and it's cheaper than accessing Grant Finder. It's a small cost, but not great. Funds Online is the directory of social change websites. It used to be called things like trustfunding.org and companygiving.org, and a couple of years ago they kind of changed it, so it's now called Funds Online, and again you can subscribe to different areas of it. Again, you can arrange a subscription offers, and you can get a trial first, so you can do that, have a look at that as well. Other periodical kind of paid for services like Invisible Grant Makers and New Trust Update look for new and emerging grant makers that perhaps wouldn't necessarily be on the radar, and can send those through to you. Again, these are all paid resources of different levels, and they're available to you if you want, but there are plenty of free ones as well. So that's giving you hopefully some tips about where to look for some funding when you know what you're looking for. But one of the problems with looking for fundraising, looking for funding and fundraising, is that temptation to follow the money and to shape activities or projects just to align with funding because there's a hole in your budget or a target to meet. And so sometimes when it feels like there are very few opportunities to access funding, how much do you squeeze yourself into a little hole? When you found an opportunity to apply, you need to really think carefully about whether applying is in the best interests of your organisation, both strategically as well as practically. So quite often you find projects which are driven by the money rather than by the mission, you're doing it because you just need that cash through the door rather than because that's actually going to help your organisation go where it wants to go. It can cause tension in an organisation. They might distract staff, volunteers from their core work. They might be difficult to deliver and often hard to report back on. Funders might be like, oh, did you actually achieve this work or not? And funders, I think, can often see through, if you like, non-mission related projects. For example, if you're, sorry, my computer has just frozen. I'm really sorry about this. I have a few problems. So I'll try and keep talking. Hopefully you can still hear me. Funders can often see through mission related projects. And I'm going to talk as my experience of a grant maker. One of the first things I would do when I would receive an application from an organisation after reading through it, I'd have a look at their website just to see, does this make sense? Does this feel right? Is this organisation in tune with the message I'm getting from the application? Because actually, if I saw something massively out of character, it gave me a big flag that they're being driven by the money and not by the mission. They've seen an opportunity fly, they're trying to create a new project or cause or case that just helps me as a funder. That's not what I want to do. I want as a funder to help organisations achieve their mission. So it's really important to think about the narrative you're giving as an organisation and make that consistent across your application, your social media, your website, your materials, your external face. And I think it's tempting to see sometimes this tug of war we're seeing on the screen between mission and money as a pull towards the money. And actually in some organisations, the pull can be much more towards the mission. It can be so strong that it prevents innovation and creativity, and actually generating different or new income sources or even responding to emerging needs can be restricted by that mission focused behaviour. So actually getting the balance right is really, really, really key. And sometimes you will want to go towards the money where the mission is less a fit. Sometimes it's okay if you're pulled by the money. Actually, if you can deliver a contract in which you can generate a significant surplus, for example, which you then can use that to deliver your mission because you funnel that unrestricted income back into your charitable activities, which help you really make it develop, that can be really, really great. So don't always think that just because something's mission and money rather than mission, that's a bad thing. It's worth understanding where it sits. And so I'm going to share with you a tool now, which some of you might have seen something like this or also very similar in the past. And so I hope my computer's woken up again. It has, thank goodness. So this is the mission versus money matrix. And so some of you might have seen something similar. And it is very much a matrix as opposed to 4 quadrants. But the 4 quadrants allow you to plot income income generation activities or even specific funding opportunities or projects along the two axes, mission and money. So if an activity is on mission, it's taking where you want to go as an organisation, it's in line with your strategy and your objects, then it's a gold star. That is the holy grail of income generation. It helps you achieve what you want to achieve and it generates income. Fantastic. However, not that many income opportunities sit in that quadrant. If an activity is off mission and generates a surplus, then fantastic. It's down there in our magic money tree corner. So for example, it might be a trading enterprise like a shop or a cafe. It may not be strictly on mission. It might generate some publicity or facilitate volunteering or even just pull people into your provision. Then that's fantastic. And so it might be closer to the blue line than further down away from the off mission, but it's probably not strictly on mission. And it also covers its costs and actually generates an unrestricted surplus you can plug into other work. Fantastic. Then, but just be aware that why you're doing it. In the top left quadrant where we have our heart, we've got activities which really are on mission, but they require subsidy. It's a heart over head type project. It's what you want to do, it's why you exist, but actually you can recognise that the money you can generate through it because it's grant funded, perhaps it doesn't actually meet the costs, and so you need to subsidise that. And as long as you understand where the subsidy is coming from and why you're letting it be subsidised, that's fine. The challenge is when we end up with an activity which is off mission but requires subsidy. Then we head into our stop section and we have to really think about why we're doing it. So for example, if we had a community centre with a mission about bringing people together, reducing social isolation and encouraging engagement, then a cafe could potentially sit in the gold star section. It could bring all those things, bring people together and make money. But if it's not making a surplus or making a loss, then actually it would sit in the heart quadrant, which is fine. You're still bringing people together, but it's not making any money. But if no one comes at all, it's not making any money and it's not supporting the mission to bring people together, why are you doing it? So the mission money matrix can actually help you really question, why are you doing this? What are you doing? And when it comes to funding applications, just thinking about where a funded project would sit, if we got this money, would it cover our costs? Is it aligned with where we want to go? Helping you to help make that decision about where you want to move to. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. And we're going to move on to the next slide. Okay, so in advance of today, I hope you were sent a PDF which had an exercise on it. So you should have had a handout piece of paper. Hopefully some of you printed out or have got access to it on your computer. In a few moments, once we've been through the setup, I'm going to put you into small breakout rooms of around 3 or 4 people, and we're going to work through this. But just to give you a bit of context and what the exercise is the handout has an outline of an organisation which is looking for funds, and they've identified 3 possible funders they could give to. So this new Chiltern Knowledge Centre is bringing together the library, archive, the History and Customer Centre for students and the public, and it's got local support, and they've generated 10 million of the 15 million pounds they need. And so they found 3 possible funding sources to identify that could potentially fill the gap. So I want you to, in your breakout rooms in a minute, to look at the mission objectives of the organisation and think about which of the 3 possible funders they should apply to, if indeed any. And maybe think about using the mission money matrix if that's helpful to you. So I'll put you into the breakout rooms in a couple of moments. When you're in there, if you make sure that you put your videos on and your voice on so that you can talk and communicate, that would be great. We're going to give ourselves 20 minutes. We may not need that long, so you can come back out of the main room if you feel you've done earlier than that. And you can also call me in when you're in the meeting room by pressing the call host button, and I can come and see you. I'll also come and check that you're all okay while you're in there. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can activate the breakout rooms. Are there any questions before I plop you into those breakouts? Just give me a wave. Everyone seems okay. Fantastic. Right, so I'm going to put you into 5 different breakout rooms. Richard, stay there. Don't go anywhere. And we'll do that now. So we'll give ourselves 20 minutes. If you need to give me a call or come back sooner, please do. I'll open those rooms now. Richard. Welcome back, everybody. Sorry to those of you who had some technical difficulties using video and microphone. Hopefully, for those of you who weren't able to, you managed to at least listen in to what was going on. So just to get a little bit of feedback, and there were some interesting conversations going in. I was nipping into rooms and having a sneaky listen, as well as having a little chat with some people. And the room numbers were a little bit uneven, so apologies about that. But is anyone, I'm going to ask room number 1, which I think had just, is it Charlie and is it Julianne in it? I can't remember now. A couple of people in it. Room number 1, those in room number 1, if you know who you are. No one can remember what room number they were, can they? Does anyone have anything they felt, many of the rooms then, that they wanted to share with everyone else? Anyone really confident about which of the 3 funding streams? So funding source number 1 being Archives Uncovered, funding source number 2, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, or funding source number 3, the Arts Council England. Anyone have any really clear views on what they felt? You need to put something in the chat, raise your hand, or just unmute yourself. There's some really interesting conversations going on, so we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, we went with the National Lottery Heritage Fund for several reasons, really. The first one, we would have considered an application to that if we'd not been successful with the lottery, if the project could have been downscaled a bit. And the Arts Council, we didn't feel was suitable due to not funding the capital work. I think that's what the Arts Council were not as interested in. So the National Lottery seemed to tick the most boxes for us. Okay, great. And I think that was seemed to be consensus across most of the groups that I listened into. Did any of the other groups, did anyone in the group just have a different view, or thought that maybe there was more than just the second one, the National Lottery Heritage Fund? There were a few interesting conversations about the Arts Council funding going on, I think.
So we said, I think we said take a phased approach. Yes, we did say about the Arts Council that they're explicitly saying they're more interested in museums now, they're more interested in libraries, and so that's quite exciting and refreshing. And that from about March of next year, because they phased their funding due to COVID, they'll be looking to implement their new strategic plan. But it's the information didn't tell us whether Chiltern is already an accredited so you have to be an accredited institution for Arts Council funding, and there may be a journey for them to get there. So they need to start possibly thinking about project funding now, smaller approaches to the Arts Council, develop the relationship. So we were saying a phased multi-agency approach. We thought they'd done fantastically to get the 10 million, which showed that there's such a great local support that's already really good. But undoubtedly, as part of that, there will need to be thinking about being more public facing, meeting the heritage inclusion outcomes. Arts Council is very interested in the lowest 5% of engagement. Arts Council is very interested in placemaking as well, so that it's not just you as an institution and your artefacts or your resources, but also how you become a resource, a development resource for the range of agencies around you. And those are the sorts of conversations that bring you towards NPO funding.
Yeah. Brilliant, thanks, Jan. Yeah, absolutely. And I think your point about staged and phased approach is really key. And actually, another group as well were thinking about kind of capacity. If they only had capacity to do one, then actually the National Lottery Heritage Fund is probably the one to go for because it's the most obvious fit. And you've really got to think about your own resource internally in terms of creating partnerships, creating projects of substantial amounts of money, and what that looks like. So that's and thinking about stages of delivery is really key. So practical limitations, implementing it. And the other thing that a couple of groups had talking about was around partnerships and developing those to either support or hinder applications. And can partnerships often help you to access funds, or do they drag you off mission? So yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to move on and just have a think about some of the other things that maybe you may have considered or may have not. I'm going to share my screen again. Bear with me 1 second. Let me do that. So click on. So other things you might want to have considered or think about when you're looking at funding opportunities might be some of these. So firstly, strategic alignment. So does it take you kind of where you want to go? And ethically, are there any barriers to access that you might need to consider? Something which is particularly relevant right now while we're thinking about heritage and the Black Lives Matter initiative which is taking place across the world at the moment, and really thinking about income and where it comes from. And we've got an example of a case study in the next slide just to explore that a little bit further. But thinking about that, and recognizing that in quite a lot of instances archives are part of bigger in larger institutions, so actually that ethical decision may not necessarily lie with you, but really thinking about the alignment of mission, and is this taking you where you want to go, or is it dragging you outside of core activities? Senior buy-in, whether that's senior management or board, is likely to be controversial in any way. Do they have your back? If it's going to be difficult to deliver or challenging to deliver in some way, or have you got the support you need? Timing and cash flow, we talked about resource, but also when's the money coming? It can take a long time to get decisions, particularly from grant makers. Is the payment in advance or arrears? Can the project actually wait for the funder? Where do you feel you're going? Also just factoring how long it takes to write a really good funding application, especially a larger one, and the interaction with the funder. Are you eligible? Really, really simple one, but actually just checking all those requirements in terms of turnover, status as an organisation, legal structure, and so on. And what's the competition like? How can you make that you are really, really strong? Fundraising is very competitive, even more so in the post-COVID-19 economic downturn. It's going to be ever more competitive. So really thinking about, are you in the right place to go for this particular fund? What's the marketplace like? What's your sector feeling like? Who else is going to be applying for that same pot of funding? And actually thinking commercially in that sense can be a real, really help you in that aspect. Who else is going for it, and how can you be better? And I did this recently with an organisation I've been working with. We had an opportunity to access some funding, and we were convinced there was an organisation we saw as a kind of competitor, for want of a better word, who would be going for this funding, and they would be they'd be they're the ones to beat, they're the ones to win it. So we made a list of all the things we thought they would win on. Where would they be really, really good? And then we were like, okay, how do we counter that? How are we as good, or where do we fit? If we can't do the same, what else have we got? And we made a really, really, really strong case, and we won. We found out subsequently the other organisation we thought were going to win didn't even go for it, but it didn't matter. What it meant is we really thought cleverly about what could we bring, what made us different, what was our USP, and how did we sell that in the best possible way throughout the process. And the process included a presentation, how could we really make ourselves come to life, as well as the actual written application as well. So thinking competitively can actually help you as well. And sometimes within the wider voluntary sector, we don't like to be competitive, but it can help you. So the case study I was talking about, just to show you that here, is an example from 2019 where the National Portrait Gallery had to make a decision between a £1 million grant and the potential damaging publicity that was emerging from it. So the particular situation was that leading members of the Sackler family, were facing a growing number of lawsuits over their alleged role in US opioid crisis. And the American artist and photographer Nan Goldin was leading the charge against them and wanted to really push and make a big deal about the issues that have been highlighted, and actually threatened to refuse a retrospective of her work that was going to be held at the National Portrait Gallery if the donation from the Sackler Trust was in fact accepted. Nan Goldin had also staged protests at other galleries in New York about the same issue. The Sackler Trust had said that family members vigorously denied it, but actually, and it kind of came across as a joint decision, that they said to avoid being a distraction for the National Portrait Gallery, you decided not to proceed at time with that donation. It seemed to be actually a mutual decision with the National Portrait Gallery and Sackler Trust to not do it. But actually thinking about, what was that the right decision? What position were they in? Where would that be on the mission money matrix? The money was, needed for their core work and would have supported the organisation's growth. And it wasn't a small amount of money in any sense, but actually, what was the detrimental risk of taking that income? Would it have been that actually people would have put the National Portrait Gallery in a bad light and people wouldn't have wanted to see it? Or would you argue that all publicity is good publicity? So each and a board's risk appetite, an organisation's risk appetite, an organisation's appetite for challenge and change is unique to each organisation. So thinking about the risk versus the value, the mission versus the money, all those things are something you want to think about when you're applying for funding. What are the risks? How does it fit? How do we feel about that ethically? How do we feel about that morally? And how does it help us deliver? And whilst that balance between mission and money, where do we sit in each situation? Okay, I'm going to wrap up there and just ask you, it's time for any questions. Before I go back to the questions, just going to remind you that this is the first module of 4 modules. Module 2 is on Thursday, on the 18th of June. We've got one at 2 o'clock and one at 8 o'clock as well. I'm going to stop my screen share and just open up the floor to you all for any questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or put them in the chat if you didn't want to speak out and or your microphone's not working, and I can absolutely read them out as we go. So any questions, any thoughts? We had one earlier that we said to someone. Ask that later. I can't remember who it was. Who was it? Was it Charlie? I can't remember who it was. He asked it, Richard. Who was it?
No, it was me.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's your turn. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just sort of wondering out loud, really, about how archives are going to have to make, get really good at selling themselves, mainly because I think it's very uncertain what position funders are going to be in once the dust has settled after the COVID-19 restrictions are lifted. I know that some funders were restricting their funding grants even before COVID-19, probably partially in relation to Brexit, and this is just going to exacerbate that. So your point about having to sell yourself and find your USP is going to be even more important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, do you want me to respond to that? Is that okay? Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And levels of competition are going to increase, but I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the sector and a lot of changes to the way that grant makers respond. Yes, there's going to be more competition, and actually probably towards the end of this calendar year, early next calendar year, you're going to see particularly grant makers suffer from the economic downturn and lack of income through their investments, which is clearly how they make their grants in a lot of cases. So we're going to see that. On the flip side, however, One of the things I think we will start to see is what we have seen as an immediate response to COVID and grant makers has been funding organisations less project focused, more unrestricted. And that has been often with organisations they've already got a relationship with in giving additional funding and being less restricted. And I think funders have really started to realise the impact and power of unrestricted grants and supporting organisations' core work. And I think we will start to see, and it's partly hopeful thinking, but it's not just me saying this, the other people in the sector are saying it too, that actually organisations will start to see that and recognise that actually trusting organisations, having a really good relationship with them, and not just getting the outcomes from one project, from a whole organisation, is actually really valuable to them as a grant maker. So I think we might start to see some shifts in the way that grant makers behave and the way that they grant, as well as an extra challenge level. So hopefully there's a bit of shade and a bit of light in that situation. Rosie has answered the question, how can you get internal buy-in for a project? Perhaps a mission versus money approach might help. And I think, yeah, that's a really, really good point, Rosie, definitely. And actually explaining something to someone who's worked with project delivery staff a lot, actually, yeah, getting their buy-in is really important. And sometimes explaining why you're doing something, not just doing it to get money, but doing it to further the mission of the organisation. That this is where we're going. This is where we want to go as an organisation. This money is going to push us in that direction. It's going to enable us to do more, to achieve this ambition, meet this target, hit that objective. Actually, yes, then showing people why you're doing it can be really helpful, or actually being, you know what, this is really valuable because it creates huge amount of unrestricted income for us, and we can use that to do the stuff we really, really want to do that which we otherwise can't afford to. So yeah, using the mission versus money approach might genuinely help. But I think the general, how do you get internal buy-in, is explaining the why, and the mission versus money is a tool to do that. Why are we doing this? What's it going to achieve, and what's the impact it's going to have? Can be a really great way to do that. Fantastic, thanks Rosie, hopefully that's answered the question. Any other questions? Oh, here's a big one, thank you Kathleen. So Kathleen's starting a project working collecting Bay archive in the northeast, and the Black Lives Matters movement added momentum to that project, but they're a partnership with the University of Tyne and Wear Archives. Is that a risk or an opportunity? Maybe the Tyne Archives are not ready. How to move actively and sensitively to gain support from partners, even institutions don't like, oh gosh, that is a massive one that I don't think I know the details enough to unpack. But I guess the questions are, I know, yeah, that's huge. I mean, I think it's an opportunity to start that conversation is, I guess, how I would see it. And actually sometimes, you know, if you're thinking, just having the conversation can be a tool to gain support from partners. So just putting it out there and starting that thing, because it feels like something that's going to take a long time. So I think probably see it as an opportunity, but a risky one. But I think, you know, I would say without knowing the details, it's a bit hard to comment specifically. But I think it is about see it as an opportunity, take it step by step, but actually it can be a really nice way of engaging more partners around it and bringing people in, which will make it a stronger project in the longer term. So that's a bit of a complex one, apologies. Thanks, Kathleen. Well, Heather's commented that she's, the National Archives have got some great resources online. Brilliant, yeah, fantastic. So thanks for that, Heather. Brilliant. Great. Thanks, Rosie, for your comment. Any other questions? We've got 5 minutes before we need to wrap up, so you have a little bit of time if you want to use it. Otherwise, there are 3 more modules, so hopefully you'll come back for some of those and there'll be some more interesting conversations to be had. You guys are challenging for 5 to 9 on a Monday night. Okay, nothing coming through on the chat at the moment. And no hand. Oh, here we go. Oh, someone's just helping Kathleen out. Brilliant. Thanks, Jan, for that. I like that you guys are helping each other. This is great. Jan has suggested that Kathleen start small and convene some whole of institution conversations about the purpose of the archive and whose stories it tells. It's a great idea. Thank you, Jan. Okay. Well, thank you so much to everyone for coming today. Hopefully you found it useful and interesting as a starter for today, and we've got 3 more modules to go. So hopefully I'll see you all at one of those, either at 2 o'clock or 8 o'clock next Thursday. And then the following sessions are the following week as well. Brilliant. Well, have a lovely evening, everyone. And I will see you all in due course. Bye.